What if the greatest science fiction ever made was never meant for Western eyes? Imagine worlds where time collapses, dreams invade reality, and technology is both savior and curse. Japan's forgotten sci-fi masterpieces dared to imagine futures too strange for Hollywood and too profound for easy translation. These are the films Western audiences overlooked and the stories that predicted everything we fear today. Number 12. The Man Who Stole the Sun, 1979. When it premiered, Tokyo audiences were stunned. Part political satire, part science fiction nightmare. The Man Who Stole the Sun was a film that seemed to ask what would happen if an ordinary man built a nuclear bomb. The story followed a disillusioned high school science teacher who, after being ignored by the system, decides to create his own atomic weapon in his apartment. His motive is not power, but rebellion against apathy. The premise alone made censors uneasy. Japan had lived under the shadow of Hiroshima and Nagasaki for decades, and the idea of a lone citizen reawakening that horror felt almost blasphemous. Rumors spread that the government requested cuts, fearing public panic and international outrage. Some theaters refused to show it altogether. Behind the scenes, production was chaotic. Director Kazuhiko Hasegawa clashed with studios who wanted a conventional thriller while he envisioned a surreal moral parable. The film's mix of dark comedy and nuclear dread left critics divided, yet underground audiences praised it as genius. They saw in it a mirror to Japan's silent fear of its own technological potential. Years later, it became a cult classic, rediscovered by Western cinephiles who marveled at how it anticipated modern terrorism, paranoia, and media manipulation. In a world obsessed with control, it remains a chilling reminder that true danger often begins with one man deciding to act. Number 11. Virus, 1980. Long before pandemic, thrillers flooded streaming platforms, Japan had already imagined the end. Kinji Fukasaku's Virus told of a deadly bioweapon that wipes out nearly all human life, leaving a handful of survivors at a polar research base. The film's bleak scope and realism made it one of Japan's most ambitious science fiction epics ever filmed. Its production was massive, spanning continents with international stars and a global storyline. Yet Western distributors dismissed it as too grim, too foreign, and too long. American studios demanded a shortened cut, stripping away the political subtext that blamed both East and West for biological warfare. Japanese critics were equally divided, calling it either visionary or tasteless. During release, whispers circulated that real government scientists criticized its accuracy because it revealed too much about actual virus engineering. The controversy added to its legend. Fukasaku, known for his later cult, hit Battle Royale, pushed boundaries with Virus, depicting humanity not as heroes, but as fragile remnants of failed progress. The film bombed at home and disappeared abroad, but decades later, it resurfaced during global crises, gaining eerie relevance. Viewers who once ignored it now called it prophetic. Virus stands as proof that Japan's sci-fi was never about flashy machines, but about the moral collapse hidden beneath progress. It warned that survival without conscience is just another form of extinction. Number 10. Death Powder, 1986. Death Powder was madness on celluloid. Released quietly and almost forgotten, it merged cyberpunk body horror and abstract philosophy years before Western audiences knew what to call it. Directed by Shigeru Izumiya, a musician and visual artist, the film followed a group of scientists experimenting on a female android whose body emits a strange, hallucinogenic dust. When that dust spreads, it blurs the line between flesh and metal, dream and decay. The film's chaotic visuals confused audiences, but beneath the madness lay a terrifying metaphor for the loss of human identity in the machine age. Some believed Izumiya had secretly mocked Japan's obsession with automation and consumer perfection. Others thought it was an attack on militarism. The censorship board nearly banned it, labeling the film indecipherable and dangerous. The few who saw it in underground screenings described it as a nightmare that refused to end. Critics either laughed or left in silence. For years, it vanished until cyberpunk historians rediscovered it, calling it the missing link between Blade Runner and Tetsuo the Iron Man. Its legacy now thrives in cult film circles, praised for predicting transhumanist dread decades early. Death Powder remains Japan's strangest gift to science fiction, a fever dream that saw the future not in shining cities, but in the rotting circuitry of the soul. Number 9. Sayonara Jupiter, 1984. Once hailed as Japan's answer to 2001, A Space Odyssey. Sayonara Jupiter tried to outshine Western sci-fi with ambition rather than imitation. Directed by Koji Hashimoto and produced by the legendary Toho Studios, it imagined humanity centuries into the future, trying to terraform Jupiter for energy, before discovering an alien threat lurking beneath the gas giant's storms. Its production was enormous by Japanese standards, featuring international actors, elaborate spaceship models, and groundbreaking special effects for the era. Yet it was also doomed by controversy. Critics accused it of being too Western, too political, too dark for mainstream audiences. Some argued that it borrowed too heavily from American blockbusters, while others said it dared to challenge them. The film's philosophical tone, its depiction of environmental collapse, and its haunting portrayal of humanity's arrogance made censors nervous. In Japan, it bombed. The public found it too cold, too strange, too hopeless. Abroad, it never found a distributor who understood it. Western studios rejected it as confusing and overlong. But decades later, Sayonara Jupiter resurfaced as a cult masterpiece, studied for its poetic realism and ecological foresight. Scholars noted how it predicted debates about climate engineering and the cost of human expansion. Behind the sterile dialogue and cosmic despair lay a tragic truth about Japanese science fiction. It never aimed to entertain, but to warn. Sayonara Jupiter stands today as both an elegy and a prophecy, whispering that the greatest threat to life among the stars is not aliens, but our own obsession with control. Number 8. The War in Space, 1977, released just months after Star Wars. The War in Space was Toho's daring attempt to reclaim the throne of cinematic space adventure, but where George Lucas gave the world hope, Toho delivered terror, wrapped in cosmic steel. Directed by Jun Fukuda, known for his Godzilla films, it depicted Earth's desperate battle against alien invaders armed with technology far beyond comprehension. Audiences expected fun spectacle, but what they got was darker and more tragic. The heroes were flawed, weary, and human. The aliens seemed more like reflections of our own militarism than monsters. Japanese censors hesitated to approve the script, fearing it echoed Cold War tensions too closely. The American version was heavily edited, deleting scenes that portrayed the United States in a questionable light. Behind the scenes, Toho's budget constraints forced creative improvisation. Sets were reused from other films, models were crafted from household parts, and visual effects artists worked without rest. The result was something raw, surreal, and unforgettable. Though critics dismissed it as a cheap Star Wars imitation, fans later rediscovered its melancholy core. It was not about victory, but futility, the endless cycle of war repeating across galaxies. The War in Space became a cult relic of Japan's 1970s sci-fi boom, a film that dared to suggest that heroism is often just another mask for fear. Number 7. Tidal Wave, 1973. Before disaster epics like The Day After Tomorrow or Deep Impact, Japan unleashed one of the most unsettling apocalyptic visions ever filmed. Tidal Wave, also known as The Submersion of Japan, was directed by Shiro Moritani and based on Sakio Komatsu's best-selling novel. It told the story of Japan literally sinking into the ocean after massive geological upheaval, forcing the nation to evacuate and confront extinction. The film was a phenomenon at home, but Western audiences never saw its full version. When imported to the United States, it was cut to pieces, redubbed, and turned into a campy monster movie featuring added footage with American actors. The original's political anguish, the quiet moments of despair, the haunting realism of mass death were erased. Behind the spectacle lay a mirror to Japanese trauma. It revisited the post-war fear that the land itself might reject humanity after all it had endured. Censors nearly banned it, fearing panic, since news outlets were already warning about potential earthquakes and tsunamis. Yet millions watched weeping as their homeland drowned in cinematic silence. The legacy of Tidal Wave lives on in every disaster movie that came after. It was not just a film about nature's power, but about a people confronting impermanence. While Hollywood saw the apocalypse as spectacle, Japan saw it as destiny. in that quiet devastation, Tidal Wave remains one of the most powerful and overlooked science fiction films ever created. Number 6. Time Slip, 1979. Time Slip, also known as G.I. Samurai, was one of the boldest and strangest time travel films ever made in Japan. It starred the iconic Sonny Chiba as a modern Japanese soldier who, along with his entire battalion, is mysteriously transported back to the 16th century during the age of the samurai. What follows is a brutal collision between past and future tradition and technology. The film opens with chaos. Helicopters hover over ancient battlefields, tanks crush wooden fortresses, and history itself trembles. The soldiers at first see the past as a playground of dominance, but soon realize that their modern power cannot save them from the moral decay of endless war. The theme was shocking for audiences in the late 70s when Japan was redefining its pacifist identity. Censors and critics reacted with unease. Some saw it as nationalist propaganda. Others called it a warning about militarism returning in disguise. Rumors spread that portions of the script were altered after pressure from government officials who feared its depiction of modern soldiers killing samurai heroes would offend both history and pride. Behind the scenes, the production was a nightmare. Real explosions near forests caused multiple safety scares, and several actors were reportedly injured during chaotic sword and gun battles. Yet, despite its violence, Time Slip offered something rare, a meditation on power, morality, and destiny. The film's legacy grew over time, especially among sci-fi scholars who recognized its philosophical weight. It dared to ask if technology could ever escape humanity's thirst for domination. Decades later, it stands as one of Sonny Chiba's most haunting roles, and a film that questioned whether progress is ever truly progress or merely history repeating itself in camouflage. Number 5. The Resurrection of the Golden Wolf, 1979. At first glance, The Resurrection of the Golden Wolf seemed like a crime thriller, but underneath it hid the soul of science fiction. Directed by Toru Murakawa and starring Yusaku Matsuda, it told the story of a mild-mannered accountant by day and a ruthless vigilante by night, waging war against a corrupt corporate world. But beneath its neon surface lay a chilling question. Where does the human end and the machine begin? The film's style was pure rebellion. Its editing was jagged, its dialogue cryptic, its violence operatic. Matsuda's character used technology, computers, and finance as weapons, as though anticipating the digital wars that would come decades later. Critics in Japan dismissed it as nihilistic and incomprehensible, while Western distributors never even attempted to release it abroad. Rumors circulated that censors objected to the film's portrayal of corporate Japan as a mechanical monster feeding on human souls. Some even claimed government-backed companies pressured studios to limit its screenings. The backlash buried it for years. But its rediscovery in the 2000s changed everything. Younger audiences saw it as a cyberpunk prophecy that predated the rise of the digital age. Scholars now view it as an early depiction of a world where humanity and capitalism fuse into something cold, unfeeling, and inescapable. The Resurrection of the Golden Wolf endures not as a crime film, but as a dark reflection of Japan's technological anxiety. A tale where the machines were not metal, but human hearts that forgot how to feel. Number 4. Sayonara Planet Earth, 1982. Long before interstellar despair became fashionable, Japan gave us Sayonara Planet Earth, a tragic masterpiece that dared to imagine the final goodbye to humanity's home. Directed by Koji Hashimoto, it told the story of astronauts sent to find a new world as Earth faced irreversible environmental ruin. But instead of salvation, they discovered loneliness, madness, and the realization that humanity cannot escape itself. The film was too bleak for its time. Critics called it slow, philosophical, even suicidal in tone. Its release coincided with a global wave of optimism about technology, yet Sayonara Planet Earth offered only regret. Censors reportedly demanded changes to scenes depicting world governments abandoning citizens, which mirrored real political fears of population collapse and nuclear tension. The production was meticulous and symbolic. Sets were built using real aircraft metal, and the camera lingered on faces more than machinery, turning science fiction into poetry. Behind the scenes, actors described filming as emotionally draining, with several collapsing from exhaustion under heavy suits and extreme heat. When it flopped, studios quietly buried it. But in later decades, as climate fears returned, the film resurfaced as prophetic. Modern audiences finally understood its warning, that space travel is not escape, but exile. Sayonara Planet Earth remains one of Japan's most forgotten sci-fi elegies. It dared to whisper what few films ever would, that humanity's greatest tragedy is not destruction, but the quiet certainty that we deserve it. Number 3. Cashern, 1973. Before the flashy 2004 remake, there was the original Cashern, a haunting television film that bridged science fiction and existential dread. Created by Tatsunoko Productions, it followed a fallen soldier resurrected as a cybernetic warrior fighting against a race of sentient robots bent on erasing humanity. It was not just another hero story. It was a philosophical reflection on guilt, technology, and redemption in a broken world. When Cashern first aired, Japanese audiences were divided. Some saw a patriotic fantasy, others saw an anti-war tragedy disguised as action. The story carried raw emotion because Japan still lived under the shadow of post-war trauma. A dead soldier, given a metal body to continue fighting, struck too close to the national conscience. Censors debated whether to limit its broadcast. The military undertones the critique of authority, and the image of human flesh turned into weaponized machinery made sponsors nervous. Even more controversial was its ending, a bleak vision of a world saved but spiritually lost. Behind the scenes, animators and writers argued over tone and message. The network demanded optimism, but the creators refused. For decades, Cashern was forgotten outside Japan. Western fans only discovered it through bootleg VHS tapes and whispered online forums. Yet its influence spread quietly, shaping the DNA of later anime, like Neon Genesis Evangelion and Ghost in the Shell. Cashern remains a masterpiece of moral contradiction. It showed that science fiction need not imagine new worlds to disturb us. It need only show us what we already are when mercy gives way to machinery. Number 2. The Phoenix, Hai no Tori, 1978. Adapted from Osamu Tezuka's legendary manga, The Phoenix was not a single story, but a cosmic cycle spanning past, present, and future. The animated film centered on humanity's endless search for immortality, embodied by the mythical bird of fire. But instead of triumph, it delivered tragedy. A warning that eternal life means eternal suffering when wisdom is absent. At its release, audiences were unprepared. It blended prehistoric myths with space-age despair, shifting between eras without explanation. Some critics called it incoherent, others called it genius. Western distributors dismissed it as too foreign and too strange. Yet, beneath its surreal structure lay Japan's deepest philosophical question. What is the meaning of existence when death is the only thing that makes life precious? Production was grueling. Tezuka himself insisted on rewriting scenes to preserve emotional authenticity. Animators worked around the clock hand-painting sequences that resembled moving paintings rather than typical anime. Rumors spread that the studio nearly collapsed under financial strain because of its uncompromising artistry. The film's censorship was subtle. Television stations hesitated to air it, fearing its themes of reincarnation and human cruelty would provoke religious backlash. Despite this, The Phoenix survived through cult screenings and academic circles where it was hailed as one of the most profound works in Japanese animation history. Its legacy is eternal, much like its titular creature. Every generation rediscovers it and realizes the same truth, that humanity's greatest invention may one day be its own extinction. The Phoenix does not promise hope. It promises clarity, a mirror held to every civilization that dares to call itself immortal. Number 1. Tetsuo the Iron Man, 1989. And finally, the film that changed everything. Tetsuo. The Iron Man, directed by Shinya Tsukamoto, was Japan's explosion of rage metal and madness. Shot in grainy black and white on a shoestring budget, it told the story of a man who slowly transforms into living steel after a violent encounter with an industrial fetishist. What began as horror became a fever dream of identity decay and machine obsession. When it premiered in Tokyo, underground cinemas, people fainted, walked out, or sat in stunned silence. Critics did not know whether to call it art or insanity. The government nearly banned it, citing extreme imagery, though nothing explicit was shown. Some theaters refused to project it, claiming audiences would riot. Behind the scenes, Tsukamoto filmed in abandoned factories with handheld cameras welded from scrap metal. Actors endured suffocating prosthetics and long nights of mechanical noise that drove crew members to exhaustion. No studio supported him, so he financed it himself using friends and relatives as extras. The result was revolutionary. It captured the pulse of a generation trapped between tradition and technology. It was not a story about machines destroying men, but about men willingly becoming machines. Its influence spread across the world, inspiring filmmakers from David Lynch to Darren Aronofsky. Western audiences would later discover it and call it cyberpunk, but Tetsuo was something deeper. It was a scream from the heart of modern Japan, a place where industry had replaced intimacy and humanity had turned itself into metal to avoid feeling pain. Tetsuo. The Iron Man remains not only the crown jewel of ignored Japanese sci-fi, but a reminder that the future is already here, and it bleeds. So, what do these forgotten masterpieces tell us? That Japan's science fiction never chased spectacle, it chased truth. Each film dared to imagine humanity stripped bare and forced to see itself. Which of these hidden gems will you seek out tonight? Tell us in the comments below, and remember to subscribe and keep exploring the worlds cinema tried to hide.